In terms of normal curves and how we utilize normal curves, first of all, here's a great example of how a normal curve functions. As you can see, the curve is symmetrical. It is a bell shape. And typically what that means is within that middle, those middle two areas right there where the peak is, and the one to the left of the middle line and the one to the right of the middle line, about 64% of people fall within that middle range. They're most likely to fall within there. And so they tend to be sort of the average performer. So on the far right, you've got 0.13, which means like an incredibly small percentage of people fit within that category. And the same thing on the far left, an incredibly small people fall in that left category. Each one of those lines to the left and to the right of that center line represent a standard deviation. And so your standardized scores are 0 is the middle, and then your one standard deviation below, that -1 represents one standard deviation below the center, 2 standard deviations below, 3 standard deviations below, and the same thing to the right, 1 above, 2 above, and 3 above. And so it kind of gives you a sense of how these would work. So those are percentiles. As we go from the far left to the far right, the 50th percentile, of course, falls in the middle, and then we are up to the 84th, 97th, and 98th percentile. And so this, anyway, you get a sense of where we're at. So when we're thinking about standardizing scores, we need to know how much above or below a standard, the mean is above the standard deviation. So how many standard deviations above or below? And so that's our goal with starting our work with a normal curve and representing sort of what that means statistically. So with reference to the previous slide where we had the normal curve there, how do we describe some of the aspects of the normal curve? I've already went through a few of those, but let me go into a little bit more detail. The percentile score is a big part of that. And the percentile score represents the percentage of people who fall below that score. And usually that is what we call a raw score that we can convert into a percentage. And so we go from a number that says 25, and we can say what percentage of people scored 25 or below 25. So the percentile score is basically how many scored below you. The central tendency, you should all be familiar with these: mean, medians, and modes. Mode is the most commonly observed score. Mean and median are very similar, except that sometimes when the mean and the median are a little bit different, and has a lot to do with whether or not the curve is following a bell-shaped curve or whether the curve is actually skewed to the left or skewed to the right, meaning that it's bunched up, not central and centered and symmetrical, but actually errs to the left or errs to the right in terms of how it's distributed. So the mean is the average, the median is the middle score. Sometimes the mean and the median are the same or relatively similar. Depending on where you have some skewing going on, your mean and median will differ based on that. The last thing is variability. Most of the time we consider standard deviation or variance when we're thinking about variability is the range of the average distance from the mean that a set of scores are. The range is from the highest to the lowest, where the range is, and the outlier is something that is more outside of the norm of a normal distribution. Scores that are significantly higher or lower than the scores in the distribution. And so you can look at a set of data and see where your outlier is, that it just doesn't fit the mold. It seems to be an unusual data point. And sometimes those outliers are important to us, and sometimes the outliers are something that we have to throw out of the data set because they are an unusual data set that really don't fit within the norm of what we should expect. Certainly as we start to see more outliers, we need to pay attention to those outliers, but one outlier is not problematic in and of itself. So as we're looking at correlations and covariances and measures of reliability and things like that, we're going to be considering variance and standard deviation, means, etc., in calculating those things. And while this is not a math class per se, there will be some Excel exercises that you're going to have to engage in to practice knowing how to use Excel to calculate the scores that you want, percentages, percentiles, means, deviations, variances, and things like that. Standardized scores are something that are very common, and we use them often in staffing and in selection issues. A standardized score is where we compare the raw score relative to a referent group. So where that person lies in reference to the average of that referent group. So a common standard score is what we call a z-score, and that z-score tells us how many standard deviations someone is above or below the mean of that referent group. And so when you want to make comparisons of, for example, a cognitive ability score, which would be a 150, and a typing test, which would be 99, how do you compare those scores? They're not on the same scale of reference. You create a standardized score, and then you can look and compare those scores to each other once we have it standardized, or we have the z-score, because the z-score can be comparable. We know how much above or below somebody is above the mean based on their standard deviations. The raw score in and of itself can't always tell us that, but a standardized score can. So the z-score is negative when the individual's score is below the mean, and it's positive when it's above the mean. And so we want to keep that in mind as we are doing calculations on standardization of scores. You're going to, again, have some exercises on how to do standardizations. So how do we convert a raw score to a standardized score? And this comes out of your textbook. It's table 8.1, so make sure you refer back to the section in which this table is set, so you can read the narrative and how to do this. But what you want to do in calculating a z-score, it's a really simple math problem, basic algebra, if you will. You take, in the numerator, the individual's raw score minus the referent mean. And so if the mean is 10 and my score is a 7, I take 7 minus 10. And then you divide that number, 7 minus 10 gives us a minus 3. You divide that number by the standard deviation of the group. And so that would be your goal. So the first thing you do when you're doing raw scores is you have the list of all the raw scores that you have. You do the average of that group, and then you subtract the raw score, and then you divide it by the standard deviation of the group. And so you can see here from the raw scores, the standard deviation in this example is a 3. The mean for the group is 18.25. So I would take 15 minus 18.25 divided by 3, and I would get a standardized score of negative 1.1. For Sue, for example, I would take 22 minus 18.25 divided by 3, and I get 1.3. And on as we can go down there. So that was for the interview score. Now for the job knowledge score, it's the same sort of thing. We want to have we have the raw score 87. The average is 78.25. The standard deviation is 7.46. So we want to take 87 minus 78.25, and then we divide that number by 7.46, and we see where they're at in terms of the standard deviation. And so if you want now to see which of these candidates is the best, you add up standard score 1, which is for the interview, standard score 2, which is for the job knowledge. You add them together and see what you come up with. And so based on this data, it's clear that Sue would be the best candidate because she's the only one scoring above, significantly above the mean for the group. Or she's 1.1 standard deviations above the mean on both aspects of this. And so she has the highest standard unit score, and she would be the one that we would want to hire. And as you can see at the bottom, just to reinforce this, meaningfully combining the raw scores is difficult. Combining the z-scores is easy because they all reflect the same thing, how much above or below how many standard deviations above or below the mean they are. And so when you combine them, that's a more meaningful combination than combining the raw scores. So that's how you would want to do this. And you'll be asked to do some of this in some exercises. The next two slides are trying to help us understand what we're looking at in terms of the skill set of individuals who come to apply for jobs with us. We assume that the applicants that come to our door represent a full bell curve from the lowest skilled to the highest skilled possible. And that's not necessarily true. In fact, many active, particularly in tighter economies, where there is few jobs and lots of people looking for jobs, or actually, I'm sorry, the reverse of that. So we have lots of jobs and fewer applicants. So particularly our skill level may be lower because most people who have a job want a job and they're fully employed in jobs that they like. So the pool of people that may apply for jobs with us may be those that haven't been able to retain jobs, are lower skilled, haven't been able to get higher skilled jobs that they want. So they don't really represent the true normal curve. They actually may be on average lower than what the whole curve of talent would be. Vice versa, your passive job seekers, people who aren't actively looking, but people who, would have an opportunity to take on a job if they would want to, if something good came along. The passive job seeker probably has a higher skill set because they're established in the job. It doesn't matter. So when we get to the next slide, I'll be able to describe this and explain this in a little bit more detail. So here's a visual that I think better explains the narrative that was in the previous slide. The current talent pool, everybody that's potentially available to take a job. That includes people who are currently employed and are passively seeking jobs, people who are moderately talented looking for work, and people who are low talent and are looking for work. That current talent pool represents everybody from the best to the worst. Passive job seekers, by and large, because they're fully employed, because they're happy where they're at, they on average perform better. So their curve, if you will, is going to be skewed a little bit more towards the right. They are going to, on average, be better at doing certain types of skills, having more intelligence, have the right kind of work ethic or personality traits that we want in our organization. And it's erroneous of us to believe that active job seekers are going to represent that full, complete talent pool from the best to the worst. Oftentimes, and as I said, particularly when we have many jobs and few applicants, our curve for the job seekers tends to shift to the left, which means that on average, they're going to be lower performers if they're actively seeking work. What this means for us when we are sourcing candidates and when we are thinking about where to recruit, we can't assume that anybody who just comes and applies for jobs with us is going to be really skilled, highly skilled. They may very well be, but oftentimes we have to go after the passive job seeker, whether that's as an internal candidate in our company or people using a headhunter to identify candidates outside of the boundaries of our company. Because we want a wide net of candidates who we think are going to be really good. Because if we don't do that, we are limiting ourselves to the range of people who are actively seeking work, and they are not always the best people, because if they're unemployed for a reason, right? So it doesn't mean that you won't have somebody who's good, because you can see you very likely can have somebody who's good, but your probability of getting the best of the best is a lot slimmer when you only use active job seekers. And so you need to have a balance of people who've applied and those active seekers, and also in your staffing strategy, be going out and looking for the passive job seekers. So now, finishing up this discussion about shifting the applicant talent curve, obviously we want to do our talent search, recruiting and selection very strategically. So if we do this strategically, sourcing and recruiting can discourage poor fits from applying and increase the number of high-quality passive and semi-passive candidates who apply. So our goal is to increase the likelihood that we get those passive workers, those who are really highly skilled, to attract them to apply for our company. we want it to be more like the distribution on the far right, the B distribution, as they say. The B distribution clearly reduces the burden on the selection system to identify quality candidates and significantly increases the likelihood of identifying high quality candidates. So we should aim always to have a system that certainly accepts active lookers, but that we want really to increase those numbers of passive and semi-passive candidates because they tend to be the higher quality candidates. And attract them to leave one company and come to another.